Aphorism 40. Everything profound loves the mask. The profoundest things of all hate even image, and parable should nothing less than the opposite be the proper disguise under which the shame of a god goes abroad. A questionable question. It would be strange if some mystic or another had not already ventured to mediate some such thing. There are occurrences of so delicate a description that one does well to bury them and make them unrecognizable with a piece of coarseness. There are acts of love and extravagant magnanimity after which nothing is more advisable than to take a stick and give the eyewitness a thrashing, or so confuse that his memory becomes some known way to mistreat their own memory, so as to take revenge at least on this sole confidant. Shame is invented. It is not the worst things of which one is most ashamed. There is not only deceit behind a mask, there is so much goodness and cunning. I could believe that a man who had something fragile and valuable to conceal might roll through life thick and round as an old green thick-hopped wine barrel. The refinement of his shame would have it so. A man whose shame has depth encounters his destinies and delicate decisions too, on paths which very few ever teach and reach, while those who exist are his neighbors and intimates may not know. His mortal danger is concealed from their eyes, as is the fact that he has regained his sureness of life. Such a hidden man, who instinctively uses speech for silence and concealment, and is inexhaustible in evading communication, wants a mask of him to roam the heads and hearts of his friends in his stead, and he makes sure that it does so, and supposing he does not want it, he will one day come to see that a mask is there in spite of that, and that is a good thing. Every profound spirit needs a mask. More around ever profound spirit a mask is continually growing, thanks to the constantly false, that is to say, shallow interpretation of every word he speaks, every step he takes, every sign of life he gives. Aphorism 41. One must test oneself to see whether one is destined for independence and command, and one must do so at the proper time. Which one should not avoid one's tests, although they are perhaps the most dangerous game one could play, and are in the end tests which are taken before ourselves and before no other judge. Not to cleave to one another, though he too the one you love the most. Every person is a prison, also a nook and corner. Not to cleave to a fatherland, though it be the most suffering and in need of help. It is already easier to sever your heart from a victorious fatherland. Not to cleave to a feeling of pity, though it be for higher men into those rare torment and helplessness chance allowed us to look. Not to cleave to a science, though it lures one with the most precious discoveries, seemingly reserved precisely for us. Not to cleave to one's own detachment, to that voluptuous remoteness and strangeness of the bird which flies higher and higher so as to see more and more beneath it. The danger which threatens to flyer. Not to cleave to our own virtues and become as a whole the victim of some part of us, of our hospitality, for example, which is the danger of dangers for rich and noble souls who expend themselves prodigally, almost indifferently, and take the virtue of liberality to the point where it becomes a vice. One must know how to conserve oneself, the sternest test of independence. Aphorism 42. A new species of philosophers appearing, I venture to baptize these philosophers with a name not without danger in it, as I divine them, as they let themselves be divined, for it pertains to their nature to want to remain a riddle in some respects. These philosophers of the future might rightly, but perhaps also wrongly, be described as attempters. This name itself is in the end only an attempt, and if you will, a temptation. Aphorism 43. Are they new friends of truth, these coming philosophers? In all probability, for all philosophers have hitherto loved their truths. But certainly they will not be dogmatists. It must often be offered their pride and also their taste, if their truth is supposed to be the truth for every man, which has hitherto been the secret desire and hidden sense of all dogmatic endeavors. My judgment is my judgment. Another cannot easily acquire a right to it. Such a philosopher of the future may perhaps say, one has to get rid of the bad taste of wanting to be in agreement with many. Good is no longer good when your neighbor takes it into his mouth. And how could there exist a common good? The expression is a self-contradiction. What can be common has either but little value. In the end, it must be as it is, and has always been. Great things are for the great, abysses for the profound, shudders and delicacies for the refined, and in sum, all rare things for the rare. Welcome, everyone. This is the penultimate episode of part 2. We'll conclude part 2 next week. I'm occupied on Saturday. With three simple and three short aphorisms, but laced with nuance. It's Nietzsche. It's continually laced with nuance. He presents forward again this love of the mask, or the mask itself. Said previously in Aphorism 2 that philosophers adore wearing this masquerade and are frightened to be timid and vulnerable before expressing their true self, thus they hire or employ a painter to improvise for them. He says this is the profoundest things of all hate, even image and parable. Why an image and parable? It's a form of internal prejudice to the external world, plus an expression of despair, which is an early sign of self-preservation. In Aphorism 13, he said self-preservation is the indirect and frequent result of discharging strength. In this sense, they're preserving their parables and images from prejudice. From wearing a mask, too. Should nothing less than the opposite be the proper disguise, under which the shame of a god goes abroad, is the questionable question that he posits before us. It would be strange if some mystic or another had not already ventured to mediate some such thing. If the opposite of this proper disguise is a god abroad, this self-glorification of a god in human form is abroad, why is it mediating through the metaphysical and physical? Why is there a messenger, an envoy, to transfer information from something we can't perceive or be palpable for us, and at the same time can't fathom? To what degree should we fathom this? Why are synthetic judgments a priori necessary to say? But he continues forward that these occurrences are so delicate in description that one does well to bury them and make them unrecognizable with a piece of coarseness. They are acts of love and extravagant magnanimity, after which nothing is more advisable than to take a stick and give the eyewitness a thrashing, and so confuse his memory. What Nietzsche's arriving at, that this delicate descriptions of the metaphysical, of the metaphysical and physical, and the messenger between those two, or a god abroad in this mystic sense, he's describing this as the free spirit. Why the am I placing, or not placing, but claiming that he's describing the free spirit? Who possesses who possesses the knowledge or wisdom or independence slash power with the will to power. The will to power is in between the physical and metaphysical world. Why? Because power you can't grasp the word power nor the will, because it's events that unfold before you inside events. Plus, he said earlier that this evolutionary existence in humanity, or inside the cosmos, or nature itself, can be originated to the ramifications and nourishment and nourishment and procreation to the will to power. And he's describing the free spirit as this individual who travels and mediates between the metaphysical and the physical at their leisure. But there's the frequent occurrence of society to wipe off this delicate description of life for something that's unrecognizable. As same with sandpaper to a rust of metal. You continue caressing this piece of coerced material on the rusted sword or rusted metal, and or wood itself, some surface, it becomes smooth. And Nietzsche's saying that that's becoming unrecognizable. The flaws and fault and folly involved in this delicate description has become unrecognizable because of this piece of coarseness that you've done to it. And he continues forward that this is the acts of love and extravagant magnanimity, after which nothing is more advisable than to take a stick and give the eyewitness a thrashing, aka blinding the individual of this acts of love and extravagant magnanimity. He would say this is the gift-giving virtue, not extravagant magnanimity, but a gift-giving virtue. What's the gift-giving virtue? Is an individual who demonstrates their strength from inner wisdom, creativity, and power, and guiding others beyond material gifts, say to the metaphysical words of guidance. The metaphysical in this sense is beyond our grasp. And it implies too to the beyond metaphysics, but if we use Nietzschean sense of metaphysics, it's the fictional, spiritual, religious, beyond world sense of metaphysics versus what is fluid, dynamic, altering, and spontaneous in the sense of eternal becoming. That's the distinguish there, where the individual grabs a stick, or people grab a stick, and see this eyewitness of a delicate description, or the free spirit, they thrash their eye, in this sense, in their memory, and they lose memory of whom they're thriving to be. Some know how to confuse and mistreat their own memories, so as to take revenge at least on this sole confidant. Shame is inventive, now including shame, or guilt, or punishment, or retaliation, etc., etc. Something to belittle this sole confidant who has great, who possess great memory of of themselves. in the sense of they don't demonstrate their strength to themselves or to others, and naturally happens. Now, with the invention of guilt or shame, it clouds and blinds the memory of the individual of who they are. It is not the worst things of which one is the most ashamed. There is not only deceit behind a mask, there is so much goodness in cunning. I would believe that a man who had something fragile and valuable to conceal might roll through life thick and round as an old green thick hooped wine barrel. The refinement of his shame would have it so. He compares, there's a great comparison. Well, first, the first sentence of not worst things of which one is the most ashamed. There's not only deceit behind a mask, there is goodness in cunning. It's not solely deceiving individuals, but the self-indulgence of being selfish to others, or practicing your form of goodness in the name of cunning, or being naive, morally and illogically cunning to other people. Say with the concept of selflessness or altruism. With selflessness, you're performing selfless and altruistic acts in the name of self-indulgence or self-pleasure while benefiting from the other person. Tie that to pity, he'll say this later, and compassion, where you're denouncing your opportunities and potentiality to to develop yourself and weakening the receiver and received, aka yourself, with compassion, thus resulting in a weak and dependent state versus a self-reliant and independent state, which he'll say in the next aphorism. I'm correct, the next aphorism. The second part is with this fragile, with something this fragile and valuable, to consider it might roll through life thick and round, aka that expression of despair or distraught, and comparing that self-preservation to a old green thick hooped wine barrel. People realize that whiskey and wine age well, albeit in this sense, the mask ages to a degree well, but it's fragile and becomes overly valued and renamed the goodness of this cunning person. But this refinement of his shame would have it so. A man whose shame has not death, but depth, encounters his destinies and delicate decisions too on paths which very few ever reach, and of those whose existence his intimacies and neighbors may not know. His mortal danger is concealed from their eyes, as it the fact that he has regained his sternness of life. The individual performing these depths while encountering his destinies or fateful decisions, in this sense, fateful but delicate decisions, on the paths. This is a rare person to see, but while at the same time they they don't appear as a mortal threat and mischievous person in other people's eyes because of them concealing and shuttering their true nature in front of other people. That's the altruistic conduct of the self-indulgence. Such a hidden man who instinctively uses speech for silence and concealment and is inexhaustible is evading communication. Once a mask of him, to roam the heads and parts of his friends in his deed, and he makes sure that it does so. And supposing he does not want it, he will one day come to see that a mask is there in spite of that. That and that is a good thing. Silently excommunicating people from your life, to a degree, Nietzsche respects. Outmaneuvering, betraying, or being treacherous to your friends you think whom do hinder, stagnate, and prevent you from moving forward in your life, which this person instinctually uses the speech silence and concealment. And it becomes almost inexhaustible to stop communication with these people. While at the same time, if these people appear before the person, the mask roams and controls in their heads and inside the hearts of the so-called friends of this person. Every profound spirit needs a mask. More around every profound spirit, a mask is continually growing, thanks to the constantly false. That is to say, shallow interpretation of every word he speaks, every step he takes, every sign of life he gives. There's multiple interpretations of this. One is the shallow interpretation that he says of every word he speaks, takes, and provides, gives, life that he gives. The other interpretation is that the spirit, while wearing a mask, is flourishing, but while appealing to be false in front of other people. A Machiavelli quote appears before my mind. It's the paraphrasing. A prince who doesn't understand the art of war cannot be respected by his soldiers. That quote, and there's another one where he exclaims that humans are fickle, covetousness, fragile, false, and use all that to your advantage, realizing the blunt and explicit nature of how we are versus how we are versus how we ought to be in the other eyes of people. But there's a third interpretation. The third interpretation is that this person is apathetic, while deceptive to other individuals and to himself. The youthful frustration and reverence of self-delusions to the surface of the consciousness. That's the third interpretation. You interpret how you see it. We move forward with the independence and commanding part. This is the order of rank. The early form of, well, another reiteration of Nietzsche would say the order of rank. Someone to see whether one is destined for independence and command, and one must do so at the proper time. To tie that first sentence or statement to what was previously said of wearing a mask, Nietzsche's saying it's vital at some times to be deceptive to other individuals while not to yourself. While outmaneuvering them, you receive a sense of independence and command. This is the part where Nietzsche's political philosophy is presented, because the person who self-commands, self-obeys, versus other people where obedience is forced upon them to command of the aristocrats at the top, the hierarchy, or the canopy of this hierarchical tree. He continues forward. One should not avoid one's tests, although they are perhaps the most dangerous game one could play, and are in the end tests which are taken before ourselves and before no other judge, excluding the judge named yourself or your legal and government name, but the person is the true judge of these tests, challenges which are presented before you. And Nietzsche is saying, if you prefer if you prefer obedience and commanding inside yourself, do not avoid these tests. Not to cleave to another person, though he be the one you love the most. Every person is a prison, though he nook and corner. Well, also not though he, also a nook and corner. AKA, detach yourself from an individual whom you love dearly. Be not solely in relationships, nor in business, nor in politics, nor in religion. He's simply saying, once this individual has guided you to their limits, it's necessary to overcome them, or you become a prison inside their penitentiary and their prison. While traveling through the nook and corners of leaving their prison. Same with, and he says the same thing, but with the fatherland, aka a nation. Though it be the most suffering and in need of help, it is already easier to serve your heart from a victorious fatherland. Self-serving, self-reliance, and not the dependence of what the state is. The state originated as the means, whilst you were the end of this means. Thus, the you were dependent on the state, and Nietzsche reverses, says, no, the state is dependent on you. You command the state, both territorially and internally. Not to cleave to a feeling of pity, though it be for higher men, into whose rare torment and helplessness chance allow us to look. Self, not self-explanatory, but um, self-descriptive and straightforward of his criticism of pity for the higher or nobler person should have this rare torment and sense of no aid or guidance to allow or accept chance. To reiterate the definition of chance in this sense is everything beyond control. Everything, yes, everything beyond our control. And there everybody gazes upon this noble and higher person where pity is negated and ostracized and an afterthought for them. Not to cleave to science, though it lures one with the most precious discoveries, seemingly reserved precisely for us. Watch my previous video on the atomistic need, and you'll see why. Not to cleave to one's own detachment, to that voluptuous remoteness and strangeness of the bird which flies higher and higher so as to see more and more beneath it, the danger which threatens the flyer. It's an oddity for us to detach and to it to continue to attempt that detachment of ourselves. And Nietzsche says, don't cleave or nor grasp nor reattach yourself to yourself, because this is a form of self-sacrifice and the most voluptuous remoteness and strangeness of the bird. He's using the analogy of a bird that flies higher and higher while seeing everybody beneath them. It's not it's not saying that they're inferior. I'll continue to laugh, humiliate, mortify every singular person. Nietzsche would say that's a weak and distraught mind of yours to inflict pain upon other people. Realize their misfortune, their flaws, and their blind obedience to everything that's attached to them to limit pain and maximize pleasure, whilst you, the lumptuous and extraordinary person, become the bird or free spirit and fly. He said in their Zarathustra, paraphrasing, I once learned to crawl, next I learned to walk, next I learned to fly, and I never stopped ever since. Thus, he's comparing this to the eagle in the prologue of Zarathustra. The eagle is represented as the ambitious, aspiring visions that's beyond and transcending you for you to strive and aspire for. And he continues forward, while warning people the haphazard or danger of lying. Not to cleave to our own virtues and become as a whole a victim of some part of our hospitality, for example, which is the danger of dangers for rich and noble souls who expend themselves prodigally, almost indifferently, and take the victim of liberality to the point where it becomes a vice, aka what functions society on collective truths from personal interpretations to objective truths. And he's saying that it's for these voluptuous and noble souls not to expand their prodigal form to become indifferent among individuals, where those individuals become the collective common person, the majority. For this prodigal form of the soul or spirit is a rare case suited for rare people. And it becomes a vice and a liberal progression in this vice. One must know how to conserve oneself, the sternest test of independence, aka aka look, teaching yourself to be silent and reserved while others dull their wits with gibberish, words, dialects, quarrels, for they haven't shot their bow and arrow for the distant targets, unlike you, the viewer. Continues forward. Now he's baptizing these these philosophers. Oh, Nietzsche. I want to baptize these new species of philosophers as they appear before me, but with a name without danger in it. As I divine them, as they let themselves to be divine naturally. This great energy was discharged on Earth for millennia or years, decades, etc., etc. This energy was reserved, still conserved, and now it's discharged, and we patiently wait for the next great explosion of energy. For it pertains to their nature to to want to remain a riddle in some respects. Again, with the riddle analogy, he'll say in all human also human that women never have one answer. Thus, women are a riddle. He says here, beyond good and evil, that ooh, that philosophers love to solve the riddle of life with one stroke and one solution of life. Now, he's implying that these individuals of eh, extraordinary prowess should be riddles in respect for the future might rightly, but perhaps also wrongly, be described as attempters. This name itself is only an attempt, and if you will, a temptation. Blunt and forward. The final aphorism for today, 43. There are they new friends of truth, these coming philosophers? In all probability, for all philosophers have hitherto loved their truths, similar to how a man is obsessed with a woman, vice versa. But certainly they will not be dogmatists, because earlier in this chapter, Nietzsche warns these individuals not to be dogmatists or martyrs, and not to be subservient nor indignant to this skeptical, bullish, vile truth as if it was innocent and clumsy as a woman to be defended. But he says it, it must often their pride and also their taste, if their truth is supposed to be a truth for every man, which has hitherto been the secret desire and hidden sense of all dogmatic endeavors. My judgment is my judgment. Another cannot easily acquire right to it. Such a philosopher of the future may perhaps stay. With the pride portion, it's it's the selfish flaunting of their taste and distinguishing judgmentally what is what is what is what is this versus what it no versus how I see versus how you see, and the disagreement between the two versus how I perform my life versus how you degrade your life. And says that, and he says that this is a secret desire before us as a sense of dogmatic endeavors. With we said multiple times of the philosopher obsessed with the truth and how this is their taste and their overinflated pride. And he says again, with this judgment is my judgment. Such a philosopher of the future may perhaps say, one has to get rid of the bad taste of wanting to be in the judgment of many. Correlate this with Aphorism 40. The good is no longer good when your neighbor takes it into his mouth. And how could there exist a common good? He says, in air quotes, but with an exclamation mark and not a question mark. The expression is a self-contradiction. What can be common has ever but little value. In the end, it must be as it is, and has always been. Great things are for the great, abysses for the profound, shudders and delicacies for the refined, and in some, all rare things for the rare. And we've discussed vividly in previous videos of how he perceives the good versus how the majority or the the what's a great word for this? the momentum to the majority, the imitation of this majority man to lessen to lessen and worsen the character of society, including the mentality to project not civilization, but the next evolutionary form of man forward. And thus everything that's what he said, everything that this expression is a self contradiction, that the good is no longer the good when your neighbor believes that it's when they take it into their mouth, and thus it's prevalent, it's ubiquitous, it's colloquial. To say simply, it's everywhere. It infects like a virus. Every good that was once perceived is now the common good in the mouth of neighbors. Well, who's concerned of these neighbors? Are they deceiving or being selfish? Plus, having the sense of appetite of controlling us, seducing us for their pointless work and pointless meal and pointless chatter and pointless talk, etc., etc. Or talk chatter, same thing. But now he concludes with that great things are solely for the great, that the abysses are for the profound, the shudderers, and the delicacies of something refined. All rare things are for the rare. There's a link in the description for the Men's Academy. I'm inside. This is 2025. I appreciate everyone of the journey that I began in November of the previous year, and to continue forward. After we finish Beyond Good and Evil, it'll be a month break of me reacting to videos and distinguishing two arguments or just reactions. There. We'll simplify it to me reacting to videos that intrigue me. And after a month of reacting to videos, we'll continue with genealogy of morals. Again, link in the description. I'm in this Men's Academy. Amor fati. Love your fate.